Chapter 13, Fiscal Policy, Deficits, and Debt.
Fiscal policy is the changing of government expenditures or taxes in order to do two things: either fix the problem of recession or to fix the problem of inflation. During recession, our goal is to increase GDP. During inflation, our goal is to lower prices. Who's responsible is the President and Congress. We're going to be covering monetary policy in a couple of chapters, and the responsibility of monetary policy is the Federal Reserve. The two types of fiscal policies, we've got one set of policies that are at the discretion of Congress, or that you have to sit down and actually make a plan to change these problems. We either sit down and decide to vote and change taxes and spending, or the other set that just happen on their own. They're automatic, meaning if John Smith loses his job, he needs an unemployment check and he needs some food stamps, but those automatic things do not require someone in Congress to sit down and create a plan for that to happen. It happens automatically. Taxation as well. When John Smith makes more money, automatically more taxes are taken from his check. When he makes less money is taken from his check. So first we'll look at the discretionary policies.
Expansionary fiscal policy is one that is used during times of recession. When GDP has decreased during the business cycle. You've got the business cycle, you've got a peak, and then you've got recession, which is 6 consecutive months of declining GDP. You go down into the trough, and then as you go back up, you've got expansion and then peak. So when we're in the recession or in the trough, the way that we get out of the trough or out of recession is to use an expansionary fiscal policy. So when do we use it? During a recession. What is the goal? The goal is to increase GDP. So who's in charge of expansionary policy? The President and Congress are in charge of the policy. There are a couple of tools that we can use during fiscal policy. We can increase government spending. We can decrease taxes. Now that's the amount of income taxes that we pay. Either one of these options will put more money into the economy, increase GDP. So if you pay less taxes to the government, that gives you more money in your pocket. So you're more likely to go out and buy a new computer, buy a new car, buy some new tires, buy some new shoes. So more spending means higher GDP. So the options are decrease taxes, increase government spending. It doesn't matter if we're spending or if the government is spending. Somebody is spending and GDP is going to increase. Or we can do a combination of both of these things. Now, the effect of an expansionary fiscal policy is that it causes a budget deficit if the budget was balanced prior to instituting an expansionary fiscal policy. It's the government's job to be in charge of the economy. If we're in bad shape as the people of the United States, the government's job is to kick off spending. So just like parents' job to take care of their children, it's the government's job to take care of the people. So the government bears the burden of recession. They increase spending or they decrease their income by providing more money to taxpayers. And by doing that, it creates less money for them. when the government decreases taxes, taxes is the number one source of income for the government. So that's decreasing their income. They're increasing spending. Just think about your own personal checkbook. When you go on a spending spree and you decrease your income, you're going to be in the negative. So the result of expansionary fiscal policy is it creates a budget deficit.
Contractionary fiscal policy.
The policy that's used when we're experiencing demand pull inflation. So the goal of this is going to be to reduce prices. Now we're going to use this at a time that's completely opposite of the time when we have used expansionary. When we go through the business cycle, when we're at the peak, and then we go down, and we have recession, and then all the way at the bottom we've got trough, and we come back up and we've got expansion, and then we've got the peak. Well, we use the expansionary when we're in recession or even in the trough, and we increase the amount of money that's available for us to have to spend. So the government spends, or they give us more money to spend so that we increase GDP. And it takes a while to do this. It may be from 6 months anywhere to a couple of years. And after we do this and we move back up the business cycle up to expansion and back up to peak, what we've done is we've increased demand, and we've made that demand curve move over to the right. After a period of time, we're going to have an inflation problem. If you remember from the supply and demand chapter, our demand curve is downsloping, our supply curve is upsloping. And if you take that demand curve and you slide it over to the right without increasing supply, what happens to your equilibrium price, if you had an equilibrium price of $3 and you keep sliding that demand curve over to the right, the more we want something, and if we don't have any more of that supply, like Super Bowl tickets, for example, everybody wants one. As it gets closer to Super Bowl, if we don't have any more supply of tickets, the price is going to keep going up. So more demand as a result of expansionary policy, eventually, once we spend and spend and spend and spend, makes us have inflation. It means that demand has pulled the price up. We talked about that in chapter 26, demand pull inflation. So what we have to do is to stop the spending. So the goal of contractionary fiscal policy is to stop spending so that we can decrease demand and make the prices go down. So the options for doing that, how do we stop spending? So expansionary policy, we put money out there for anybody to spend. So contractionary, we're trying to contract the economy, make it smaller, stop the spending. So everybody has to stop. The government stops, individuals stop spending. So the best way to stop us from spending is to take our money away. We said the two tools of fiscal policy were taxes and government spending. So policy option 1 for contractionary fiscal policy is going to be to increase taxes. So the more taxes we have to pay to the government, the less money we have available to spend, so our demand will come down. Policy option 2 would be to decrease government spending. Or we could do a little bit of each one of those things, a combination of each one. So if the government's budget was balanced to start with, let's think about what would happen if we implemented a contractionary fiscal policy. Well, if you remember from our government spending and income chapter, we said that the number one source of government income was the personal income tax. So us bringing in more taxes to the government, that's like more income to the government. So if a government's
has a balanced budget by bringing in more taxes, that's like more income, that makes your checkbook balance go up. And if the government stops their spending, they decrease government spending, that's also going to make the budget go up. So the result on the budget for the government of increase in taxes, decrease in government spending, is that we have a budget surplus. And a surplus means that we have increased revenue, more revenue than government spending. Now, problems created by fiscal policy. You're going to see a definition called crowding out, and you'll also see a diagram on your outline of something that few boxes that start small and get bigger. Now, this is the explanation of crowding out. If you've already, some classes have already covered this, but some haven't. You learned that the government sells securities, and that securities are United States Treasury bills, bonds, and notes. Well, one of the things the government can do when they don't have any money is to sell these bills, bonds, and notes. And when we say the government is in debt, that $15 trillion, we're talking about in debt for these. That's only what we owe in bills, bonds, and notes for that $15 trillion. So the crowding out problem is the fact that expansionary policy, when we decrease taxes and increase government spending, causes the government to be in the negative. It causes a deficit. So it makes the government go broke. So in order to get us out of a recession, to implement expansionary policy and to move us out of a recession, the government has to spend, and it puts them in a deficit. So that first box says government spending exceeds tax revenue, which is called a deficit. So government deficit increases. So the government doesn't have any money. So what do? The government's broke. They can print more money, or they can sell bills, bonds, and notes. Well, printing more money causes inflation, so they don't want to do that. So the next option, the government's broke and they need to build, say, a federal courthouse, or they need some sort of project, they can sell bills, bonds, and notes. So let's just say that they sell some securities. And you'll also learn in this chapter that 34% of our debt of bills, bonds, and notes is to foreigners. But if the government advertises and says, we're going to sell some government securities, they can sell these to banks, they can sell them to individuals, they can sell them to anybody. So when we do this, this crowds out private investment. The crowding out part comes in because all of us would have our money in the bank, in the private money market, say like in Hancock Bank, Regions Bank, Keesler Federal Credit Union. And when we loan this money to the government, which is what we're doing, when we buy a bill, bond, or a note, we're taking our money out of the bank and we're really loaning it to the government. Of course, we're going to make money off of it, but we're loaning it to the government so that they can do some sort of project with it. So when we take our money, so if there's 30 of us in the classroom and 30 of us go down to Hancock Bank and we take out our $10,000 and give it to the government, then that causes a shortage of funds at the bank. And our interest rate is determined by the supply of money and the demand for money. So if that supply of money goes down, it makes the interest rate rise. And this whole concept of crowding out means that government spending in expansionary policy crowds out private investment, so that when Jane Doe and John Smith goes back into Hancock Bank and says, hey, I'd like to get a loan to start my business, the interest rate is now going to be higher because we all took our money out and gave it to the government. So this initial government spending and an expansionary policy, in the end result, causes the interest rate to rise in the money market. We have some timing problems with fiscal policy. We have the recognition lag, the administrative lag, and the operational lag. The recognition lag is the time between when an economic problem starts and when you recognize it. So you may have, say, inflation. You may have prices that are beginning to rise, and it may take you 6 months to recognize it or 3 months to recognize it. So the recognition lag would be the time between when it started and the actual document and recognizing that it happens. So we recognize it, it's here. So what are we going to do about it? Okay, administrative lag is the time when you recognize it, you document it, or let's say that GDP has fallen for 6 months straight and we're now in a recession. So what are we going to do about it? Administrative lag is the time between when we've documented that we're officially in a recession, then we have to decide what to do. We've heard the saying, it takes an act of Congress to do something. Well, this is the administrative lag. You've got to make the House and the Senate decide which plan of action to take. And sometimes this takes a month, couple months, sometimes 6 or 8 months to decide. So between the recognition and the passing of a policy, that's administrative. Then once you vote on a policy and you make the decision, the operational lag is the time period between making the decision, implementing the policy, and its effect on the economy. So operational lag can take, it might take 6 months, it might take a year, might take 2 years for the policy to be implemented and for it to have its effect on the economy.
We've covered the two types of discretionary policies, which are policies that are at the discretion of the President and Congress, or they require us to sit down and make a plan and actually vote on what we're going to do to fix the economy. Now we want to talk about plans that will help you or fix problems that do not require any action by policymakers. These are called automatic or built-in stabilizers. Built-in stabilizers will increase or decrease a budget deficit during certain times, either inflation or recession. But the important thing about automatic stabilizers is they do not require any specific action by policymakers. So what happens with these? Let's talk about that now. The two types of automatic stabilizers are net tax revenue and transfer payments. And here's how they work. During peak times of the business cycle, GDP is going to be at a max. So during those times, we're going to be making the most money. So GDP is up, our incomes are going to be up. So the more money you make, the more taxes you're going to be paying. So let's add on that. GDP is up, income is up, taxes are up. So when we're doing really well, we are not going to be needing any government assistance, which is going to be unemployment, food stamps, etc. So transfer payments will be down. So in the good times, in peak times, GDP up, income up, transfer payments down, and net tax revenue up. Again, automatic stabilizers do not require any action by policymakers for these things to work. You know, Congress doesn't have to call up your employer and say, hey, look, John Smith is working more hours this week, so we need to take out more money from his check. That doesn't happen. It happens automatically. Now, during the recession or trough phase of the business cycle, what happens? Okay, GDP starts to fall or is at its lowest point, so income is going to be down, which means the amount of taxes we pay is going to be down, which also means we may need some government assistance. We may need some unemployment checks. We might need some food stamps. So transfer payments will be up. So let's recap. During recession, GDP is down, income is down, net tax revenue down, and transfer payments up. This is how automatic stabilizers work.